Hello everyone and welcome back to this channel, OHL in 20. This is where we break down all 20 OHL teams and cover news such as player stats, trades, and what the upcoming season might look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the team that was in last season to the success of what the first place team last season was. Now, obviously, we know that there were only three teams last season that didn't have the greatest performance: the Niagara Ice Dogs, the Windsor Spitfires, and the Peterborough Petes. All of them almost having fairly identical record in a sense. The Niagara Ice Dogs finishing with 42 points, 17 wins, 43 losses, 6 overtime losses, and 2 shootout losses. Well, the Windsor Spitfires weren't too far behind them as they had 44 points, 18 wins, 42 losses, 5 overtime losses, and 3 shootout losses. And then just trailing ahead of them was the Peterborough Petes with 20 wins, 40 losses, 7 overtime losses, and 1 shootout loss. The Peterborough Petes and the Windsor Spitfires, I believe they're going to be a little bit more fierce this season. They're not going to be as bad as they were last year, but I think that they are still taking that climb to rebuild themselves and their entire franchise. Where you look at the Niagara Ice Dogs, and I've said this multiple times in the past couple of videos, I believe that the Niagara Ice Dogs are going to make the playoffs in the next couple of seasons. This is probably going to be their last season that they don't make the playoffs. The Niagara Ice Dogs, they're looking dominant, they're looking fierce. But what could we expect from, well, all of these trades that the Niagara Ice Dogs have been acquiring over the offseason? Could this be a playoff contention team? Probably not, but they are capable of proving themselves compared to what they have been in the last couple seasons. Because you got to remember, the Niagara Ice Dogs haven't made the playoffs since 2019. So it's been a while since a championship or an actual playoff run have come to the city of St. Catharines at the Meriden Center in Niagara. So we know that every year, four OHL teams don't make the playoffs, two in the Eastern Conference and two in the Western Conference. The Niagara Ice Dogs and the Peterborough Petes were the two teams that didn't make it last season in the East. We saw that the Windsor Spitfires and the Sarnia Sting were the two teams that didn't make the playoffs in the Western Conference last year. Sarnia, obviously, they finished with 54 points, 25 wins, 39 losses, 3 overtime losses, and 1 shootout loss. The Sarnia Sting, they're looking to, not just rebuild and regroup, but they're looking to do it as fast as they can, pretty much. I'm going to break down what my top 20 predictions are, but I'm just going through what the standings were for last season. And could there be some shifts? I do. I do believe that there are going to be some shifts in the OHL overall standings for next season. So in 16th place, finishing overall, was the Barrie Colts. They were the last team to clinch in the OHL playoffs, and they faced the Oshawa Generals in the first round, only to win game 1 against the Oshawa Generals on the road. So that was pretty impressive and cool to watch by the Colts playoff run in the first round. Not too far behind them was the Flint Firebirds. Well, they had a dominant season, but are they going to be as strong and competitive this coming season? Only time will tell. The Owen Sound Attack were just ahead of the Flint Firebirds, and not too far behind was the Kingston Frontenacs. The Owen Sound Attack, I think they might be just a little bit lower next season. That's my prediction. And the Kingston Frontenacs, they're just that one step ahead as they acquired players like Nolan Lalonde, the goaltender who just won the Memorial Cup with the Saginaw Spirit. The Kingston Frontenacs looking to leapfrog the Ottawa 67s, making sure that they claim that title of a playoff marker. And could we see the Kingston Frontenacs having home ice advantage? Potentially, but we also have to see who their main competitor will be in the first round if they end up making it that far, which I do believe that they will. Just ahead, the Kingston Frontenacs, we had the Guelph Storm finishing 12th overall in the league. Are the Guelph Storm going to be competitive? Absolutely, they are. But are the Guelph Storm going to be capable of fighting a team like the Erie Otters? Mm, I don't know. It's going to be tough. Jet Luchenko, he obviously went in the NHL draft to the Philadelphia Flyers, but could we see him back on the roster? Potentially. It all comes down to what the Flyers in the NHL are capable of looking to him on their roster. Maybe he finds himself in the AHL, or maybe he finds himself signing a contract with the Philadelphia Flyers come the NHL season. We're not too sure. Maybe he even gets his chance in the preseason. That's where a lot of players who just got drafted or a lot of players down in the minors, that's kind of where they get to prove their opportunity and their chance to really show what they can do on and off the ice as an individual. So, could we see Jet Luchenko playing for the Philadelphia Flyers in the NHL preseason? Maybe, but it might look like Jet Luchenko might be back on his way to playing with the Guelph Storm again. This all comes back to Zane Parekh with the Saginaw Spirit. Do we see him playing with the Calgary Flames? Do the Anaheim Ducks hang on to Beckett Seneca, who went third overall in the NHL draft this past offseason? So it's going to be interesting. A lot of players are capable of bringing their full potential. But you look at players like Sam Dickinson on the London Knights. You look at players like Ben Danford on the Oshawa Generals. What are these players capable of? You know, Carter George, the goalie for Owen Sound Attack, do we see him back in the lineup for the attack this coming season? Only time will tell, but it also depends what these players are capable of bringing time and again in the season, in the OHL season. If we have NHL scouts in the stands this coming OHL season, these players who just got drafted could very well find themselves playing at the beginning of the season in the OHL and maybe the mid or end of the season in the NHL, or maybe even just getting called up to the AHL. You know, I've woken up some mornings only to discover on social media that one player has signed with an NHL team or an AHL team. So it's cool to see what these players are capable of as they take that next step to enhance their hockey career. So the Erie Otters, they finished ahead of the Guelph Storm, only trailing below the Ottawa 67s, who are probably going to take that step back, which is why I'm going to give you my predictions for what the OHL standings could look like. The Sudbury Wolves were just ahead of the Ottawa 67s. They were that, fierce, dominant competitor team. They made many trades with, especially with the Flint Firebirds this offseason. Are the Sudbury Wolves capable of making the playoffs? Yes, they are. But I think we're going to see the Wolves kind of take that step back to regroup themselves. Because remember what I mentioned in the past couple of videos that I recorded, the Sudbury Wolves are looking to build a new arena in the future. I believe it might be 2028 that the Sudbury Wolves are looking to build a new facility. If the facility is ready in time and the Sudbury Wolves regroup themselves and rebuild their franchise right now, we could see a very dominant and competitor Sudbury Wolves franchise going into the future. So this is what the future looks like for Sudbury. Just ahead of them, the Mississauga Steelheads, obviously making their way to Brampton this season. What are the Mississauga Steelheads, aka Brampton Steelheads, capable of bringing to this Steelheads franchise? Well, the Mississauga Steelheads, I mean, we just saw that they just claimed the captain of the Erie Otters, bringing him to Brampton. And you're going to see, this might surprise a lot of people of what my predictions of the standings are going to be, but the Steelheads, they could be one of those top five teams. I'm not even joking around. This is a very fierce Steelheads team that are not only competing for top spot in the conference, they're looking to claim top spot in the league. And that's why I did some shifting around in my prediction standings for the overall standings of what it will be like or what it could be like come next season. Just ahead of them, the Brantford Bulldogs, they had a fantastic season. The Bulldogs were fighting time and time again, whether they were playing at home or on the road. The Bulldogs made it so far based on their goaltending, Droback. I mean, you look at Droback and how successful he was for this Bulldogs franchise. What could we expect to see from Droback this coming season? You got to look at player goaltenders like Droback, Jacob Oster on the Oshawa Generals. What are these players going to bring to, the future of their hockey career? And could we see these players over time make their way to, NHL draft day, just like we saw with Bennett Seneca, Ben Danford, Sam Dickinson, Zane Parekh. You also look at Kevin he was fantastic for the Niagara Ice Dogs, very dominant. He was just a goal scoring machine for the Ice Dogs last season. And then we saw him get drafted by the Winnipeg Jets in the NHL draft in the offseason. So it's players like that the scouts, that's why we have scouts at these games to look for players like this. In some way, it can be very unpredictable to see, to guess where these players are going. Even when it comes to the NHL draft, well, this is all based on lottery balls. So you never know where these players could end up, what the impact could be for the future of these franchises, and can they actually turn the future of these teams around? Just ahead of the Brantford Bulldogs, we had the Kitchener Rangers, followed by the North Bay Battalion. These two teams, you just couldn't hear enough of them last season. Could we see more of the North Bay Battalion, but less of the Kitchener Rangers this year? Like a player like Rakoff, when they just traded him, is that a sign that the Kitchener Rangers are stepping back? Well, we saw them as a very fierce competitor, especially every home game for this Rangers club. I saw the Kitchener Rangers play in Oshawa this past season, and they just don't back down. Parsons, oh my goodness, Parsons, fantastic goalie. I mean, he is not just the face of the Kitchener Rangers going into next season now that Raycroft isn't on the roster, but what is he capable of bringing to his hockey career? Where could he land maybe potentially in the NHL draft? All these players can really do is just perform at their best level and just give it all they got and prove themselves for where they actually want to be in their future. Not only did the North Bay Battalion end up playing the Oshawa Generals in the Eastern Conference Finals last season, but they finished just below the Oshawa Generals, down 2 points. The Oshawa Generals finished with 89 points, followed by the North Bay Battalion with 87 points. This was a very, very competitive series. I saw the Oshawa Generals play their home series against the Ottawa 67s and they swept them. But man, if I was to go to a game against the North Bay Battalion, that one was even more competitive. And you would probably expect the same from the Oshawa Generals and the North Bay Battalion this upcoming season. I do. I really think that the North Bay Battalion and the Oshawa Generals, they could find themselves competing once again. Maybe it's not in the Eastern Conference Finals, but maybe it could be in one of those first or second rounds that we see these two teams competing and battling for that last spot again. Not to mention the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, who finished overall third in the league with 95 points, 45 wins, and 18 losses. This was a team I was expecting to even get past the Saginaw Spirit, but the Saginaw Spirit was just too strong, especially for a team that went all out, considering that they were hosting the Memorial Cup last season. This team was just not going to let the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds in their way. That's where we bring up the Saginaw Spirit, where the Saginaw Spirit finished second in the league, 102 points, 50 wins, and 16 losses. Not only did they finish just below the London Knights and they ended up defeating the London Knights in the Memorial Cup, but the London Knights had their first revenge on the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL finals, where the London Knights claimed that OHL title, but the Saginaw Spirit got the revenge in the Memorial Cup, of course. These two teams finishing with 50 even wins for the season, London finishing top 104 points to finish off the 2023-2024 OHL season. That's how the overall OHL standings finished last season. But what's my prediction? Well, I did some adjusting and some of them might be a little surprising. I'm probably going to get a lot of comments down below saying, how can this team be that far up? Or how can that team be so far low? Well, again, this is just my prediction. And I had to really base it off of the trades that have just happened and what the overall rebuilding futures could look like for all of these franchises. So I'm sorry, but the Niagara Ice Dogs, I had to put them last again in 20th. Again, this is a Niagara Ice Dogs team that is just going to, build themselves up. They are going to be stronger this year, I do believe. But this is, like I said in previous videos, this is going to be potentially the Niagara Ice Dogs last season that they don't make the playoffs. They're probably going to be in the same spot last year. They're going to be stronger, but again, it all depends, especially if a player like Kevin He comes back to join the Ice Dogs franchise and organization. If he doesn't end up playing with the Winnipeg Jets, could we see Kevin He having a miraculous performance with the Niagara Ice Dogs once again? And maybe if he does and the Ice Dogs go on some kind of a run, you saw how the Edmonton Oilers went on, a 20-something run last year. Could we see a run like that with the Niagara Ice Dogs with the players that they just acquired from Sudbury and Barrie and Flint? And if Kevin He's back in the lineup and Flores is playing phenomenal between the pipes, we could see a very competitive and dominant Ice Dogs team, maybe not just this season, but going into the future. So I place the Ice Dogs in 20th place for the overall standings at the end of this coming season. Finishing in 19th place, the Windsor Spitfires. Well, they were finishing 18th last season, but I've put them a little bit lower, just because I think that Peterborough Pete's organization is going to take a little bit more of a step up. Not to say Windsor won't, but I think that the Windsor Spitfires, they're still in the rebuilding phase. They're still, building up their organization time and time again. So I think that this Windsor Spitfire team, they're still going to be, that team that's drawing back a little bit. They're going to be that other Western team that probably doesn't make the playoffs. Who do I have in 18th place? Owen Sound fans, you're not going to like hearing this. I'm placing you in 18th, even though you finished much higher this past season. It all just comes down to what can you prove on and off the ice. Can Carter George stay with this attack season after being drafted to the NHL? Will he be back? Maybe, maybe not. What about Colby Barlow? I mean, we saw him last season, get drafted to the Winnipeg Jets. So if Colby Barlow and Kevin He end up playing for the same team, what is that going to do for the Owen Sound and Niagara franchises? We can't say. But if Colby Barlow, the face of the Owen Sound attack over the past couple seasons, and Carter George, strong goaltending in between the pipes. If these two players aren't on the roster next season, what are we going to expect from this Owen Sound attack franchise? I think the Owen Sound attack, they're a very small market, but they got a big heart. And I think that the Owen Sound attack are just going to take that step back just a little bit, just to regroup themselves and see what they're capable of bringing next season. In 17th place, we have the Peterborough Petes. The Peterborough Petes, they're still not ready, I think. They don't want to rush into building themselves up. They want to take their time. They want to gather as many draft picks as they can and just build for the future. So, as an overall sense, the Windsor Spitfires and the Owen Sound Attack, I think, are going to be the two teams in the Western Conference that don't make the playoffs next season. And again, the Peterborough Petes and the Niagara Ice Dogs not making the playoffs again in the Eastern Conference. But I think the Peterborough Petes and the Niagara Ice Dogs, as long as they just keep rebuilding themselves, those two teams will make the playoffs next year. Could we see maybe Ottawa and Sudbury not making the playoffs next season? We don't know. We'll have to see. But that's just my predictions for what the last four place teams standings could look like. In 16th place, we have the Guelph Storm. Guelph is going to be very competitive. They did finish a little higher last season, but I think again they're going to take that step back for their overall franchise. Is Jet Luchenko going to be back with the organization, or is he going to make that way up to the NHL or even the AHL? We're going to have to see where Jet Luchenko finishes. But, you know, we just can't say. But that's just my prediction of where I think the Guelph Storm are going to finish. Just above them, the Sarnia Sting. Yes, the Sarnia Sting are getting better, but they're also taking that little drawback just to, regroup themselves, just to figure out where are they? Where is this franchise actually going? We want the Sarnia Sting to be successful, of course, but we also don't want them to overload themselves where they're not going to that marker where they think they're going to get, if that makes sense. We want the Sarnia Sting to be capable and passionate and devoted to bringing a championship to Sarnia, but you also got to look at what does the Sarnia Sting future look like for these individuals? Are they bringing in more overaged players, or are they kind of, you know, building more draft picks for younger players to rebuild that franchise? So we're gonna have to see. I had to be honest, as a Barrie Colts fan, just above the Sarnia Sting, the Colts are finishing in 14th this overall season. You saw how many prospects, especially Dallas Stars prospects, the Colts have been bringing into their market. So I think the Barrie Colts, if I'm being honest, they're looking to make another playoff push. They're not looking to rebuild from the wire. I think the Barrie Colts, if the Barrie Colts were looking to take, we saw an obvious step back from the Barrie Colts, we could probably see them making a few adjustments by maybe, I wouldn't say they would be trading Bo Akey and players like Kayshawn Aitchison. You look at Sam Hilbrant, he's a fantastic goalie. He's coming up from the States, from Florida. And so players like Hilbrant, Aitchison, Bo Akey. They want to make a last good impression because these were the underaged players coming in when players like Connor Punnett and Ben West and even Antoine Thornton were finishing off their OHL careers. So, what does this potentially look like? Could these players now becoming the overagers and proving themselves? Because again, we're seeing a lot of Dallas Stars prospects come into this Barrie Colts organization this coming season. But overall, I think that the Barrie Colts are going to finish 14th overall. They're not that mid-level team, but they're kind of that team that's building on prospects, but just keeping an eye on the future, just making sure that they don't go overboard and find themselves in a complete disaster for this overall franchise. They want to stay competitive, but I don't think we'll see them as one of those top 5 or 10 teams this season. Coming in 13th place, the Flint Firebirds. Now, this is a team that finished below Barrie last season. I'm going to say that the Flint Firebirds are finishing above Barrie this season. Very competitive. We saw the trades that they were making, that three-way trade that they made between Barrie and Niagara. We saw the many trades they made between Sudbury. They made a trade between Peterborough by sending Jenkin to the Pete's organization. So we're going to have to see what this Flint team is capable of bringing. They're not going, I'm going to be completely honest, they're very much behind the Saginaw Spirit by a long shot. But if the Saginaw Spirit end up making a draw back after winning that Memorial Cup championship and they start to kind of, do what the Peterborough Pete's organization did 2 seasons ago, take that step back and rebuild themselves. And if the Flint Firebirds are rebuilding right now, could we see the Flint Firebirds better than the Saginaw Spirit in the next couple seasons? So we're going to have to really keep our eye on these two clubs, these two arch rivals in the state of Michigan. Ahead of the Flint Firebirds, we have the Ottawa 67s. Like I predicted, I think the Ottawa 67s, they're not going to be that top 15 team. They're going to kind of be that more top 12 team. They're going to be competitive, but they're kind of taking that step back, which is why I haven't said the Kingston Frontenacs yet, because I think the Kingston Frontenacs are going to take that step ahead of them. But before the Kingston Frontenacs, in the 11th place in the overall standings, I have the Erie Otters. The Erie Otters are very capable of keeping an eye on their franchise and not making sure that the only team in their state of Pennsylvania has a good and successful season on and off the ice. We can see the Erie Otters as kind of that mid team, but they're just below the Kingston Frontenacs, where I think Kingston and Erie are going to be very tight this season, even though they're in two separate conferences. The Erie Otters and the Kingston Frontenacs are going to be very even. And I think it comes between a three-team showdown, if in a sense, with the Ottawa 67th and 12th, the Erie Otters in 11th, and at 10th place, I had the Kingston Frontenacs. They're going to be good and competitive, especially acquiring Nolan Lalonde from the Saginaw Spirit. We could see the Kingston Frontenacs making that step approach to be a little bit more fierce going into next season. In ninth place, I've put the Sudbury Wolves. The Sudbury Wolves have been very competitive over the past couple seasons, but we saw them make multiple trades this past offseason, especially between Flint. And you might think, why isn't Flint and Saginaw kind of those bottom mid teams right next to each other? Well, maybe the Erie Otters drop down a little bit more from Ottawa. Maybe Ottawa just takes that little step ahead of the Erie Otters, but I do think it's going to be a three-team showdown between the Kingston Frontenacs, the Erie Otters, and the Ottawa 67s, followed by the Flint Firebirds. I think after the Flint Firebirds, we might see teams like Barrie, Sarnia, Guelph, Peterborough, Owen Sound, Windsor, Niagara really start to clutter themselves. Stay competitive, but just play hockey. Where teams like Flint, Ottawa, Erie, Kingston, and even Sudbury, those are the teams that we kind of could see in the mid league competing this coming season. Now, just ahead of the Sudbury Wolves, we have the Kitchener Rangers. I was going to place them a little higher, but I've been seeing some signs of the Kitchener Rangers taking a little bit of a step back by trading Raycroft. So, with Rakoff off the Kitchener roster, what does this prove for the Kitchener Rangers franchise? Could we see the Kitchener Rangers making a little bit of an adjustment to rebuild a little bit? Could we see signs of rebuilding in the Kitchener Rangers, even though they've been very dominant? Or could we see the Kitchener Rangers putting up a very competitive show, especially against rivals like Brantford? Brantford is a top team, but how capable are they going to be when they're competing with a team like them? In seventh, I have the North Bay Battalion. So we're starting to get into these top five teams now, but we're in at number seven, and we have the North Bay Battalion. The North Bay Battalion, very fierce. I would highly rank the North Bay Battalion over the Sudbury Wolves by a long shot, but not too far behind the Sudbury Wolves. The North Bay Battalion, they're kind of like that Kingston Frontenac team where they're ahead of a team like Sudbury, where Kingston is ahead of Ottawa. So North Bay Battalion, very dominant, but what could we see in between the pipes? Could we see more trades going down between the North Bay Battalion? We're going to have to find out and see what all unfolds for this battalion franchise. In sixth place, I got the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, and this was a very tough one because there's teams I haven't mentioned yet, but I was kind of really adjusting back and forth. Should I put Sault Ste. Marie in this top five, or should I drop them just below? I decided to put them in six only because, they were very competitive against the Saginaw Spirit, but they haven't made too many trades in the offseason. Where Saginaw, they just won the Memorial Cup. I think they might be taking not first or second spot this season. They're kind of going to step back. They're not going to step back all the way like Peterborough, where they went from championships 2 seasons ago to pretty much second last in the league. I think Saginaw is still going to be competitive, but if you still have Zane Parekh on the team and he's not on the Calgary Flames roster next season, we could see the Saginaw Spirit very dominant and fierce, which is why I've put Sault Ste. Marie at six and Saginaw at fifth. Saginaw will be that fifth playoff contention team overall in the league, and not too far ahead of Saginaw. This is going to surprise and shock a lot of people, but this is what I feel that the future will be for this franchise. The Brantford Bulldogs are going to be finishing fourth. Wait till you think who I've actually put above this because this was very tough. The Brantford Bulldogs, you got not only you do you have Donanov and Droback. What does the future of this Bulldogs franchise look like? To be honest, the Bulldogs look very fierce and competitive. I don't think they're going to be doing much of a rebuilding. That's kind of why they rebuilt it a little bit in Hamilton. But when they made their way to Brantford, that's kind of when they've started to, prove themselves a little bit more. So yeah, I do think that the Brantford Bulldogs are going to be better than the Sault Ste. Marie and the Saginaw Spirit this season, and even the North Bay Battalion. So the Brantford Bulldogs, I've got placed at fourth. But just like last season, just ahead of them in third, I got the Oshawa Generals. We saw that the Oshawa Generals finished in the Eastern Conference finals last year, as well as the OHL finals with the London Knights facing off against North Bay Battalion and the London Knights. But what is this Oshawa Generals team capable of bringing next season? Well, for one thing, you got Jacob Oster between the pipes. He's pretty much your starting goaltender. He's kind of like your Andrei Vasilevsky, Shesterkin kind of goalie. He's gonna be the face of this franchise going into next season. Then you got a backup goalie like Noah Bender, who just came from the Wesley Applejacks a few seasons ago after winning the PJHL tournament with them. And then you have players like Ben Danford. Okay, he just signed with the Leafs. He's probably not going to be there. But I think the big question is, are we going to see Beckett Seneca with this Oshawa Generals roster? I don't know. I can't say. We will only know when the season rolls around. Now, I'm going to go back to the Saginaw Spirit for a second here, just to recap something a little here. I saw on social media yesterday that Zane Parekh was apparently back at the Dow Event Center with the Saginaw Spirit getting ready for preseason. He's been drafted by Calgary, but do we see Zane Parekh back with this Saginaw Spirit roster? That's why I've placed them in the top five and not anywhere below the top 10. So could we see Zane Parekh back with the Saginaw Spirit? It's the same thing with Beckett Seneca with Oshawa, except Beckett Seneca went third overall in the NHL draft to Anaheim. So I'm curious to know, could we see Beckett Seneca as an Oshawa General come September? We'll have to see. Obviously, we've seen teams like North Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Saginaw, Brantford, Oshawa. All these teams are going to be very competitive next season. There only comes down to two teams, and it comes between the team that made it who won the OHL championship last year, the London Knights, and the team that just relocated from Mississauga, the Brampton Steelheads. I have the Brampton Steelheads at second. Brampton, as as frustrating as it is for me to say, the Brampton Steelheads are going to be finishing second in the OHL playoffs. Oh boy. Just with all of the trades that they've acquired, how dominant and fierce they were in Mississauga, how competitive and fierce are they going to be in their new barn in Brampton? Not only is this team going to be competitive and fighting for the conference, they're going to try, and I don't think they can do this, but they may win a couple games, but they're not going to overtake the London Knights. I can pretty much guarantee you that the Brampton Steelheads are not going to overtake the London Knights for first. But I think the Brampton Steelheads might just be, it's going to be very, let me be honest here, it's going to be very tight between Brampton and Oshawa and Brantford. These three franchises are going to be very, very tight next season, which was very hard for me to rank, which is why I put the Brampton Steelheads at second and the London Knights in first. London Knights, we obviously saw them make that OHL championship last season, overtaking the Oshawa Generals, but we might not see the Saginaw Spirit as that top team this year. They're still going to be good. Again, that's why I've placed Saginaw in the top five. But there's teams like Brantford and Oshawa and Brampton that might get in their way. This could change. I might be off by a fraction. I might be off by a point or a win that could really adjust the standings. but this is just my prediction of what I actually feel like could really go down between all 20 of these franchises. So let's compare last season to this season. What do the standings actually look like? We got Niagara in last, followed by Windsor, Owen Sound, Peterborough, Guelph, Sarnia, Barrie, Flint, Ottawa, Erie, Kingston, Sudbury, Kitchener, North Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Saginaw, Brantford, Oshawa, Brampton, and London. That's my predictions for the overall standings going into the 2024-25 OHL season. What are your thoughts? Who do you think is going to finish? Maybe there's a team that's finishing higher than you thought it was going to be, and they'll be ranked lower. Maybe there's a team ranked lower or in the middle of the pack that's going to rank higher. Let me know what you think. But be sure to check out more of my videos and what do you expect for the upcoming season and for each of these organizations. Who do you think is going to stay with the OHL clubs and who do you think is going to the NHL after being drafted in the NHL draft? Let me know in the comments, but be sure to leave a like and subscribe and be sure to check out more of my videos. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.